uncensored. Welcome to COASTER-net Uncut. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to COASTER-net Uncut. I am, of course...
Who are these guys? Who are these guys?
Seriously, where have we been? We've been on vacation, it seems. Like, you know,
Oh my God, have we ever?
We freaking... blew up August, did videos like once a day.
And then dropped off the face of the earth after Labor Day.
We were getting
Dueling Dragons being thrown in the scrap heap got us all depressed. We took 2 months off from roller coasters. No, that's not what we did. We're going to talk about at least what one of us did.
People were crying on YouTube. Where did you go? Come back, please. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we are back. For another great episode of COASTER-net Uncut. We are here at the end of November, looking back on the season that was 2017. And Danny, you actually had a pretty cool experience towards the end of October here, where you got to go on a long extended tour of the British Isles of the UK.
That's right.
Had a jolly good time.
We had a jolly good time, we did. Now, see, I was told by our buddy Matthew Summers, who lives in Yorkshire, who a good friend of mine who listens to Coaster Radio. Met him through Coaster Radio. He met up with us a couple times over the course of the trip. He met us at Flamingo Land. I'm wearing my bright pink Flamingo Land shirt. Probably one of the closer parks to him, and also Lightwater Valley. And then he also went to Alton Towers with us, so kind of had a local giving us the lay of the land, and his girlfriend Bex also joined us at Alton Towers, so it was good fun, as they say, to have him join us for a couple days. And they said towards the end of the day at Alton Towers that I actually had a pretty convincing British accent going by the middle of the trip, so not gonna dip into that too much here.
Oh, it can't be as good as my Canadian accent is. Like, I'm sorry.
Canadian, right? But no, we had a jolly good time, as they said, and we're not gonna sit here and talk for an hour about the trip in general. We're gonna do a little bit of that, but we're also gonna talk about the top rides from the trip, really the top roller coasters mainly. We'll dip into some of the other rides here, but maybe we'll break it up a little bit. But we kind of talked about maybe doing the top 10 roller coasters from the trip, and I have one wood coaster in the top 10 from the trip. So that's going to be weird. Now, keep in mind, there was only 5 wood coasters on the entire trip, and 4 of them were at the same park.
Well, the Brits know what they're doing over there, obviously.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, you would love it over there. Now, of course, there is a new wood coaster being built for 2018 at Alton Towers, the Wickerman, or at least that's not that hasn't been announced yet. But
yeah, when are they going to actually? Like, come on, when are they announcing it? Like, the beginning.
I don't know. I mean, they've got teasers all over the park, and they're doing marketing campaigns for it. They just haven't announced the name yet. It looks fantastic. We take the Sky Ride, which takes you right over the construction area. It looks like it's going to be a good fun, as they say. And it is going to be a lift hill. It's not a launch. It is a lift hill, but it is an oddly shaped lift hill, and I believe it probably has something to do with their height restriction. We'll get into that a little bit when we talk about Alton Towers. So should we start, I guess, with number 10 on the roller coaster list?
Yeah, absolutely.
Kind of start at the bottom here. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to chicken out here because I don't rank my wood and steel coasters together here. So I don't on any of my other lists, so I'm not going to try and start doing it here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to give you the one wood coaster that I would put in my top 10 from the trip, and we'll talk about that a little bit, and we'll dive into Blackpool because the number 9 coaster, I guess, if you will, the top 10 from the steel list is also going to be from Blackpool Pleasure Beach. So we'll first talk about the Grand National here, and that's how they would say it over the Grand National. So if you know the Grand National, similar to the Kennywood Racer in that it is a Mobius racing coaster. one of only 3 in the world. There were a few folks on this trip. Now, this trip was run by the Coaster crew, but by the way, and first and foremost, big thanks to Tim, Kate, John, and Jonathan, who helped put together the trip. They did all the scheduling. They did all the itineraries. Everything went very smoothly, start to finish. Normally, there's 24 in the entire group, and usually when you have big trips like this, you tend to leave late and arrive late, and things don't go according to plan. I think the latest we left from one of our destinations to leave on the bus was 3 minutes over the entire trip. Everyone, the whole group was fantastic. And some very well-traveled folks. Some people have been on 700, 800, 900 different roller coasters, some of which who had been to the UK previously. And a few people on the trip, by riding Grand National, completed the trio of the Mobius racing coasters. Obviously, the Kennywood Racer, and then the one in Mexico, the Montaña Rusa, I think is the official name of that, at La Feria, and then obviously the one here at Blackpool. Grand National, I think we agreed it was a backseat roller coaster. A lot of very good yank on, and now I will say, I will
yank
say,
for the Yanks.
Yes, the Yanks. some yank for the Yanks. Sitting over the wheel seat in the very back row was a touch rough, but I enjoyed it. Now sitting in the middle row of the car, obviously in the back train, was a much smoother ride. Still had very good yank. The first drop is a double down. So if you're familiar with Kennywood Racer, with the Mobius racing coaster, you're also familiar with the Jackrabbit, and its double down is the main element there. This is how this ride starts, but it has a lot of other good drops. It's a very long ride, too. Some great airtime, good ejector airtime as well. Very much enjoyed the Grand National. A very busy day at Blackpool. We were there on a Monday, and we were there the last full week in October, which in England is known as the half term. It's basically like spring vacation or fall vacation over here in the States, when your colleges take a fall break sometime, in late October, early November, maybe over Thanksgiving, which we just had. This was their fall break, so all the parks were open during the week. So they were very busy because it was basically like a vacation week. Now we had the speedy passes, so we had to wait in very few lines at Blackpool. And most of the other parks, we also cut the lines in. But the Grand National, I think, to me, is the crown jewel of the wood coaster collection. That having been said, I know people are going to ask about the Wooden Wild Mouse. The Wooden Wild Mouse was down for maintenance. We knew that going in. That is one that we've talked about a lot here. It does do well in the Thrilling 32. One of only 2 roller coasters on the entire trip that by height restriction I was able to ride that we did not ride. The other one being Rita at Alton Towers, which I'll talk about. Some folks did get to ride Rita from our group. A few people did. We'll talk about Rita a little bit later. But so no Wooden Wild Mouse this time around. However, a good reason to maybe go back in a few years, because we did enjoy the trip overall and did enjoy Blackpool. And, of course, Icon, the Mack Rides launch coaster being built at Blackpool. Yeah. But Grand National, very, very fun. Probably could use a little bit of retracking in spots, but not enough to take away for the ride for me. And, I'm a wood coaster guy. For me, I ended up putting Grand National at number 19 on my wood coaster list, which is high praise even from me. 120.
Now is that above El Toro?
Absolutely, it's above El Toro. Absolutely, it is above El Toro. It has a lot of sustained ejector airtime, surprisingly, as El Toro does, but it has a lot more of it. Because it is a much longer ride time-wise, has a lot more hills, has a lot more elements. So that puts it in the Mind Blower, White Lightning, Prowler, Cornball Express range, for those of you who are wondering about where that puts it on my list. Not quite as high as like Outlaw Run or Shivering Timbers, or Renegade. Not quite as high as those. But definitely higher than El Toro. So we'll transition from there. Now, the other thing I have to say is Blackpool, the other wood coaster to maybe make note of is the Big Dipper, which is actually home to the world record for the longest roller coaster marathon. Now, Andy, I don't know if you know this off the top of your head, but when I say the Guinness World Record for the longest roller coaster marathon, how long would you guess that was?
Didn't this just happen like a few years ago?
No, that was.
I felt like there was one in England that just happened a few years ago.
That was not the
Really?
that was not the world record one. The world record. Hold on, I haven't talked about it in a.
Yeah, because if it's the one I'm thinking of, it might have been for like. Oh man.
It's not the one. It's not the one you're thinking of. I
Yeah.
think you might be thinking of the naked roller coaster, which we're gonna get to. But this one happened in August 1998, so it's somewhat recent. But
Yeah, it's not as recent as I thought it was. So yeah.
no. So Richard Rodriguez. So what would be your guess for length? What would be a really long time to ride a wooden roller coaster for you? A good wooden roller coaster.
I would say 2 laps.
Okay, so I would compare the Big Dipper at Blackpool to maybe like a Comet at Hershey Park.
The great Comet at Hershey Park.
It's in that. It's a good size ride. I mean, what would you guess that this guy rode if I told you it was a world record?
I would think maybe a day or two, somewhere around that range.
So Richard Rodriguez set a world record by riding the Big Dipper for over, wait for it, 1,000 hours. 1,000 hours. He rode the Big Dipper for nearly 2 straight months from late June to mid-August. There is a plaque in the station. Station is very beautiful, by the way. And he it is ridiculous, right? So here's what Wikipedia says. Guinness World Records nullified the achievements by altering the rules in 2007, and Rodriguez's new record was set on the big one, and the Big Dipper stands at 405 hours and 40 minutes. So they altered the rules as to how they count it. We were told by a gentleman before the park opened, we had a little bit of a tour, and he said that over the course of the 1,000 hours, he was brought food on the ride. He was allowed to sleep while on the ride, which I think is one of the rule changes they've made now, that you can't sleep while you're doing marathon rides like this anymore. The only time he got off of the ride was to actually go to the bathroom, and there is a bathroom right near the ride there. But other than that, they brought him food, they brought him drinks, they brought him soap and water to bathe himself while he was on the ride. Now, they still said he didn't smell very good at the end of all this, but so nearly 2 months of riding a wooden roller coaster all through the night. They had operators there overnight. He was just sitting in a seat during regular operating hours. It's like, imagine that. And 1998, like, that seems like something that would happen in the 50s.
You may find that impressive. I do not. I find it disturbing.
You do it then. Well, disturbing. Hold on. Disturbing maybe, but it's still impressive nonetheless. Come on now.
I don't know. It's like if someone told me they stood on their head for 16 hours. I don't know.
No. So moving on here, I guess the number, we're going to do the top 9 steel now because the other 9 are steel.
Something to talk about now.
The big one, which for several people, myself included, completed the trio of Aero True hypercoasters, I guess you could call it, being Magnum XL 200, Desperado, and the big one. Big one, definitely the tamest of the 3. Good, decent floater airtime over some of the hills. It is more of a scenic ride. The first drop, however, is fantastic. If you look at pictures of the drop, it has a very severe and quickly jerking bank, which is like over 90 degrees, and then you go into the swooping turn. In the back row, it's definitely an oh shit drop, and the rest of it is kind of, oh, that was nice. You've got a nice little tunnel at the end. You've got a few pops of airtime. In the second half, you've got a helix. Most great views, obviously being right on the water, and it does kind of go mostly around the park. It is a very scenic ride, not so much an intensity ride.
Well, I find that interesting because you brought up the other 2 arrows, and And you think of both Desperado and Magnum, and they're both very scenic rides as well. You know, you have beautiful Lake Erie, but then people forget Desperado. You got the beautiful mountain landscape all around you as well, which you really don't get on a lot of roller coasters. Maybe outside of like places like Lagoon, where you have the mountains right next to you. You know, both those rides, Magnum in my top 10, you know, Desperado in my top 25.
No, this isn't going near those rides.
And that's kind of sad because, you know, I've heard talk of the big one for, you know, for so many years. And people, you know, mention it when they talk about, you know, these arrows, and it's kind of disappointing that they didn't build it up to the level of the other two. Now, granted, the other two were both record breakers when they opened. You know, Magnum obviously.
This still is the largest ride in the UK.
Yeah.
So let's keep that in mind too. Stealth at Thorpe Park is very close as well. But I had tempered expectations going into the big one, so I was not disappointed by it. I think I rode big one 8 or 9 times over the course of the day. That back row is absolutely fantastic on that first drop. Good pops of air in both the front and the back. But I mean, they're pops. They're floater pops. They're not the Desperado Magnum, you know, ejector surprising oh shit airtime that you're used to on those two rides. It's very much more of like B&M floater going over the Arrow Hills. It's more comfortable than I think the other two, probably because it's not as intense. But the first drop is one of the best first drops anywhere. So, you know, that's a, you know, kind of a positive there. Moving on here, we're going to move up to number 8 on the list, which is probably going to surprise some people, especially those who have ridden the ride. At Thorpe Park, Colossus, the former record holder for most inversions with 10, the quadruple barrel roll, and then followed by the other way barrel roll at the end. Colossus, to me, was one that took me by surprise because a lot of the locals tend to rank it pretty low. They tend to not like the roughness. To be fair, I think I rode it four times. Well, Thorpe Park sat in the front row every time because of that. When I go into a ride knowing that it's got a reputation for being rough, I will typically sit in the front row, and if I enjoy it there, I won't deviate from that plan. Colossus in the front row, very good. A couple of good spots of airtime. There's a couple of airtime hills in there. The inversions are very forceful. You know, it does rattle you around a little bit, but certainly not as bad as some of the other Intamin rides that you would expect to rattle. I was going in expecting something like Fahrenheit and something in that category, and I thought it was much, 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 much better than Fahrenheit. And sitting in the front row, you do get the visual of when you come around that left-hand turn and then you kind of pop up over the top of a hill and you're staring down the quadruple barrel roll, and to see that track in front of you and then to go through it, and they're perfectly shaped. So it feels like you're just turning and turning. There's no jerks in it at all. So you're just continuously rolling. And it's almost too much. And then you go through the fourth one and you're done, and you do the left-hand turn because you're rolling to the right the entire time. And then you make the left-hand turn, and then you do a left-hand barrel roll right into the brakes. So it kind of, you start to get dizzy after the fourth one, and then you actually do unroll and you're kind of stabilized again because you're not dizzy. At least I wasn't dizzy after that last one. And maybe you don't get as dizzy when you're not in the front seat with the visual there, but it was very disorienting, and I liked it.
Well, Intamin is usually pretty good with their rolling. And I know a lot of people talk about Volcano at King's Dominion, where their barrel rolls, you know, it's an inverted coaster, so it's a little bit different, but their barrel rolls are engineered to like exacting measures.
Oh yeah,
so that you have a great experience through them. So it's interesting that you say that, because that requires engineering to figure out how to get through those barrel rolls without getting everyone sick at the end. And it seems like they've found a way to do it. You know, so that's kind of cool.
Yeah, Colossus was definitely a very welcome surprise, because that is a ride that I was hoping would be good, and had heard from a lot of people that it was not very good. So I was very pleased that I enjoyed it as much as I did. Just above Colossus at number 7, and then maybe we'll break and talk about a few of the other parks. Also at Thorpe Park, at Nemesis Inferno, or as some people will call it, Nemesis Inferior. Now, Nemesis Inferno, B&M inverted coaster, which they wanted to call it and this is information from Matt from Yorkshire as well. They were going to call it Inferno, and they wanted to capitalize on the huge following that Nemesis has at Alton Towers, so they just stuck the name Nemesis in front of it. The sign even uses the same text that the Nemesis sign at Alton Towers uses. The word mark is written in the same exact text, so it's Nemesis Inferno.
Kind of stupid, but
Very, I think, comparable to the Batman clones in terms of layout and size. You've got a vertical loop, you've got a 0G roll, and then you've got interlocking corkscrews, and then you've got a couple of helixes. Nemesis Inferno is interesting because it's got a very extended pre-lift section where it goes into a tunnel underneath the station. Pretty good theming. It's got like jungle, volcano type theming. It was okay in the front, but the back seat was very good and actually smoother, which is rare for the inverted coasters.
mm-hmm.
Typically, they're smoother in the front. There's sort of like a bubbling, boiling, I don't know if it's a tar pit or something underneath the first loop. And when you're in the front seat, there's like a burst, like a water or tar splash when you go into the loop. And then again, when you're coming down out of the loop, it does it again. So you get a nice visual in the front seat, but I thought for sure the back row provided the superior ride experience. Very much enjoyed Nemesis Inferno, not as much as Nemesis, the older brother, which we'll get to a little bit later in the rankings, but very much enjoyed Nemesis Inferno. Now, we'll break just a second, and I'll talk about some of the other parks that we're not really going to mention here. We did 11 parks in all. We already talked. We're going to talk about Alton, Thorpe, and Blackpool. But we also went to Flamingo Land, which I talked about, which actually has a lot of rides. They have 10 roller coasters, one of which is only for kids. They're Little Go Gator. And a couple ones we're not going to talk about. They have Kumali, which is the custom SLC, which I think is now called their Shenlin model, but it was the first of that kind. Has a loop. Cobra roll, smoother than a lot of the other SLCs. Oddly enough, it was on our ERT. There was one ride cycle, which we were on, and then it broke down and did not run the rest of the day. So there were a handful of people in the group that did not ride it, which is very strange. There was like, I think 6, 7, 8 people in the group who didn't ride it because they weren't on that first cycle. Very, very odd. They have a Steel Hog clone known as Mumbo Jumbo, which was fun. The standout for me, though, was their Vekoma motorbike launch coaster, Velocity, which at that point in the trip was my favorite coaster of the trip at that point. Now, it was only our second day, but and it was the first half of our second day, and it was beaten out later on in the day. But Velocity, very good. Why don't we have some of these Vekoma motorbike coasters? We've got the Zamperla ones, which are kind of like the knockoffs, but the Vekoma model, far superior. Good airtime, good speed, excellent launch, and a much better layout, in my opinion.
Well, you look at Vekoma, and I think people are going to start questioning over the next few years, why don't we see Vekoma doing more stuff in the States? Yeah. The stuff that they've been showing off over in Europe, and now, just today I saw a new one over in China. The stuff Vekoma's doing is really outstanding work, coaster-wise. You get to like the Lek coaster in Poland. Yeah. Why are the states not working with Vekoma more? I don't know. I don't know if it's the stigma of many enthusiasts don't like Vekoma because of the whole aero stuff. Yeah. I could care less, to be honest with you. I want coaster companies to build good rides, and I'm kind of excited because what Tron is coming, right? So yeah, we'll get something at least.
Yeah, hopefully the Tron coaster is somewhat closer to what Velocity is, because I very much enjoyed Velocity, and I was very happy that was a ride we got to re-ride because it's a ride that is known for its maintenance issues. So I was very happy that we got a couple rides on it.
And I'll say this from a GP perspective. You know, I know a handful of people that have gone over to China and have ridden the Tron coaster. And one of my former students, you know, texted me and said, why don't we have like you just said, why don't we have something like this in the States? And I said, ha, 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 you're in luck, because in the next 5 years we will have something like this in the States. Where and then just recently we saw Disney revealing the plans of where Tron is actually going to go inside Magic Kingdom. And I'll tell you what, I'm pretty excited, because not only does it look like a pretty fun ride, but I'm absolutely in love with that Tron Legacy movie and the whole look of it. And I think it's going to be visual.
It looks like a lot of brake runs to me, but we'll see what the ride does. Hopefully, the theming makes up for that.
I think it's one of those things where it's going to be visually stunning, and I think you're gonna discount, the ride itself, kind of like Rock and Roller Coaster. People rave about that one. And it's not that great of a ride.
Yeah, well, So the other thing that I do want to share before we get back to the list is the Gulliver's Parks. And if the people I've talked to you've probably never heard of them, and you'll probably never go to them. The Gulliver's Parks, there's actually quite a few of them. We went to 2 different ones over the course of the trip. The Gulliver's Parks, imagine if Legoland had a rule that adults can't come into the park unless they're with a child. That's the rule. That's the written rule that these parks actually have. So when we went to the Gulliver's Parks, we had to go in, we checked in at guest services, and had to have a tour guide take us from ride to ride, because you are not allowed to be in that park unless you are with a kid the age 16 or under. I don't know how they found these parks. I had never heard of these parks. Not really anything notable to talk about. At the parks, they had a couple of cheesy, wimpy dark rides. They had mostly kiddie coasters. There were some credits there, so fine. And we only spent like an hour. The one park, they actually said it's only an hour before closing, because it was like 4:00 and they closed at 5. They were like, it's only an hour before closing, just go ahead. And we just quick ran around and hit the coasters and the 4 coasters and the dark ride they had, the 2 dark rides they had. And that was pretty much it. The other park, we were there for about 2 hours, and they actually walked us around from coaster to coaster.
I think you're onto something here, Danny Miller. I think it might need to become standard practice that coaster enthusiasts need to have armed guards take them around any park, not just kids parks.
Probably
any park.
Because, I mean, these folks were smart not letting 24 Americans run amok around their park meant for kids. We had way too much fun at these 2 parks. More fun than you would ever imagine, because there were just a lot of jokes to be had, and quite frankly, we embarrassed ourselves on like the wacky worm. We're all going nuts, and we were chanting wacky worm, just trying to have a good time about it. But it was fun and definitely a unique experience, because unless you got a kid with you, that's not a park you're going to be able to go to if you ever do a UK trip. So some rare credits for sure there. But why don't we get back to the list here?
Yeah.
So
a list of good things.
Yes. So we'll get to number 6. Number 6. This is where Alton Towers is going to make an appearance here with Galactica. Now, this is an interesting one to talk about because of the virtual reality, which has been so controversial. This was really one of the first coaster, maybe the first coaster, I think, to actually have virtual reality. It went on a couple seasons ago. I think after the first ride, I think Adam Beard, as soon as we hit the brake run on the first ride, said it best. Sound makes all the difference.
It does.
Because Galactica has the headphones with the sound that is very crystal clear, had wonderful space imagery, wonderful space storyline. They're kind of briefing you as you're in the queue and in the station, and then as you're going before you go up the lift hill, as you're going out of the station and underground up to the lift hill, they're kind of giving you the story of what happened. I won't spoil it for anyone, but absolutely wonderful. Absolutely loved the VR on Galactica. And it's interesting because they do come around afterwards, and it's like the Kraken one where they have the box that it goes in. Yeah. And when they come back, they ask if you wore the headsets, and then, they clean them off right there. Whether or not they do a good job, I don't know. I guess it depends on the day. mine didn't smell bad or anything, and it was right at the end of the season. So, and then going back, so I rode it 4 times altogether, rode it twice with the VR, loved it both times, rode it a third time without the VR. And this was interesting because we did it twice with the VR before we did it without the VR. So it was very interesting riding a ride that I didn't know the layout of with the VR, because after you ride a ride 2 or 3 times, you usually have a pretty good feel as what it's doing. Whereas after the 2 rides with the VR, it felt like I was riding it again for the first time, the third time, because I had no idea what the layout was. And then to see it, and I will say this, Galactica Air, whatever you want to call it, maybe without the VR, it's called Air still, I don't know. Definitely the flying coaster that makes you feel most like you're flying, because you are very close to the ground. You're very close to the trees throughout the entire ride. And there's even that extended section of the ride where you're on your back like you are on some of the Vekoma flying coasters. Mm-hmm. So to have that on a B&M and not have the shakiness of the Vekoma was very, very strange. Surprisingly forceful, but still very graceful. And a lot of good near misses, a lot of good visuals. Probably the best flying coaster in terms of executing the feeling of flight best.
Well, that's cool. I like you mentioned Kraken, because I did get to ride Kraken with the VR, mm-hmm. and I thought it was by far, I did the VR on Iron Dragon, did it on Demon for the Rage of the Gargoyles thing. Liked both of those experiences, but like you said, it's the volume that gives you that immersive experience. The sound and I'm sorry you didn't get to ride Kraken with the VR when you were down at SeaWorld, because I think you would like that one just as much as Galactica. I have heard though that Tampa, there were rumors going around that the VR treatment was going to go on Kumba, and I've heard that has since been scrapped. So.
Well, hopefully nothing else is scrapped.
Well, they did go through the regular maintenance of Kumba, so you would think it's still staying open. But I've heard that all the issues that plagued Kraken, and I'm not quite sure if did you experience? You were at Alton for some time. Did you see any downtime with that? Because SeaWorld was having a hell of a time.
Not at all. Kraken. Nope, and we rode it. We had the fast tracks there, were part of our package, the platinum. So we got to skip the all the lines, mm-hmm. and we rode. I would say it probably took us about an hour to ride Galactica 3 times, because there was a little bit of a fast track line, maybe not quite, maybe about 45 minutes to ride it 3 times. But there were no issues over the course of that entire time, and we rode it again at night. Sue and I went back and rode it again at night without the VR. Because there is that neat little space portal that you go through that's all lit up, and there are sections of the ride lit up blue. So very cool night ride as well. A lot of the rides at Alton, very good night rides, but I didn't know of any issues, at least not while we were over by the ride. And we spent quite a bit of time over there, and also at Nemesis, which is right next door.
And I haven't heard of much talk, so I don't quite know. I don't know if it was the virtual queuing that SeaWorld was trying out, because they didn't want a line, because they didn't have any of that at Galactica. It was just a straight up line, right?
Yeah, straight up line.
Yeah.
Yep. And when you get put on the ride, you have the choice to put on the goggles or not.
Yeah. So I don't know, but Kraken from all reports has been a disaster at SeaWorld, and that's a shame, because it's a really great experience.
Yeah, Galactica is proof that the VR can work, and it can be done in spectacular fashion, because that's exactly what it was. They should call it spectacular. Anyways, so moving on, we'll go to the top 5 steel coasters here now. Next up, might surprise some of you, but the Swarm at Thorpe Park. B&M Wing Coaster, layout not too different from X-Flight, but it is larger, more forceful, definitely, especially in the back row. For the visuals, you want the front seat, absolutely. You still get a lot of the visuals throughout the train, but the most intense ride was in the back row. And it was very, very interesting, because typically I like the front seat for the visuals on the wing coasters, but back right, I think, was the consensus spot of our group to ride Swarm. And especially at nighttime, because Swarm actually has the red eyes and the red like bullet, chaser lights on the train.
Yeah.
So you get to see all of that in front of you. Now they have turned the back 2 rows of Swarm back around, so they are forward. So we didn't get to ride it backwards. That was like a 1 or 2 year thing they did a few years back. The theming of Swarm is absolutely spectacular. You go under the airplane wing at the first drop. Periodic fire coming out of the broken fire truck. You go through a billboard. You do the little roll over the station, which is like an abandoned church, if you will, that's been kind of torn down and destroyed. Great theming in the entire area. The gift shop is in kind of on-end shipping containers that look like they've been destroyed, which ironically enough, we stayed at the Thorpe Shark Hotel, which is their on-site hotel on the island. Thorpe Park is on an island, folks. So to get to the Thorpe Shark Hotel, you actually have to go through the turnstiles across the bridge onto the island, and then right on the edge of the island is the Thorpe Shark Hotel, which the hotel rooms are repurposed shipping containers, which was very interesting. They're small. They're 2-people hotel rooms. You probably could fit 3 or 4 if you wanted to, but if you had light baggage, no more than 2 for the folks like us who had, a week and a half. Some of us 2 weeks worth of luggage. Some folks stayed a little bit longer, came earlier. Very unique place though. But Swarm, fantastic. It's the only ride on that part of the island. There's actually a lake kind of off to the side, a small pond lake area that Swarm Island, the island that Swarm is on, is man-made. They built an extra island in this little lake that's on the main island, and that's where they built Swarm. So Swarm was a very expensive project because they had to build an island in this pond that's on the island that's already in the middle of a lake. Yeah. Very, very strange. But Swarm, 2 thumbs up for me. Great theming, butter smooth, very forceful. No complaints with Swarm.
That's always been one that I've loved to look at in pictures of that. I've always liked Swarm for some reason. That and Raptor at Gardaland at Italy.
Yeah.
Those are both 2 really pretty rides, you know.
Yeah, I would say if you put together the layout of X-Flight and the visuals of X-Flight and with the tower and everything, and kind of if you took the layout of X-Flight and then did the theming and the visuals of maybe Raptor at Gardaland, and then you maybe had the intensity of Gatekeeper, that's kind of what Swarm was. It was kind of a mishmash of those 3.
So here's a question. Does that make Swarm the best of your wing coasters?
I still have Thunderbird higher, but I do have it higher than all of the other ones. Not by much. Now Wild Eagle is actually my second at this point. It was my 4th for a very long time, and Wild Eagle has kind of grown on me. I do prefer Swarm to Wild Eagle. So I don't know if it's the launch or if maybe it's just riding it at night at Hollywood Nights about Thunderbird.
Well, yeah, Thunderbird's clearly the best one. Like that's
But of the 4 traditional ones, I guess you would say that I've been on: Gatekeeper, X-Flight, Wild Eagle, and Swarm. I would take Swarm over all 3 over the 3 others.
Because it's interesting because those 3, Gatekeeper, X-Flight, Wild Eagle, on different days I feel different ways about them. Like currently Gatekeeper is the best, but I've always said if they now here's a question, because I've always said if they unlock the vest on X-Flight might be the best. Were the vests unlocked?
They were not.
Okay. So
they do the child locking like Wild Eagle and X-Flight. However, I didn't really notice it. When we first rode, I checked it to see if it would, and it does lock, but it didn't tighten on me on any of our rides. We rode like 5, 6, 7 times, and I never had an issue with it like I have on X-Flight or Wild Eagle, and definitely Gatekeeper at the beginning.
Oh, Gatekeeper at the beginning was unbearable.
Because Gatekeeper is so intense, which is funny because Swarm was very, very intense, but it didn't bother me at all. It wasn't hurting my car. It was very, very strange that it was still that intense, but it didn't bother me at all on Swarm. Because
maybe they don't have it set because even though it locks, the problem with Wild Eagle and X-Flight is that it also it not only locks but it pulls too.
It continually
So it's got the really strong spring on it where it's always trying to pull it tighter at every point. So to me, I've always said if they unlocked either Wild Eagle or X-Flight, it would probably be a different discussion for me. I think Gatekeeper's clearly the best of those three, but if they unlock the other two, I said, you know what, it would really open up the discussion because especially in X-Flight with that double with the the barrel roll through the tower and through the the little caution tape thing, that would be outstanding with an unlocked vest. That element would be outstanding.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think you would very much enjoy Swarm. I was not expecting to like it as much as I did, but Swarm top 40 coaster for me on my steel list, which is quite high. We're talking about after this trip 492 steel coasters. I'm up to 621 total now. Did hit number 600, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. But Swarm number 37 out of 492. That's very, very good. It's very good.
And it's funny, that's about where I have the other wing coasters, too.
Yeah. Well, it's also funny because we've still got 4 more coasters to talk about. So that means there's 4 that are higher than this. So let's move on to number 4 then. And this will be one of 2 surprises. There's 2 that people are probably thinking of right now that they're saying, okay, those 2 are still going to be mentioned. And these other 2, number 4 and number 2, actually. Number 1 and number 3, everyone's going to expect. Number 4 and number 2 are going to be surprises for everyone. Number 4, 13. And I'm a big Verbolten fan. Yeah. Okay? Everyone knows this. And, we'll talk a little bit about 13. Spoiler alert here if you don't want to know what goes on and all the, the story and whatnot. So the story of 13, obviously, it's the unluckiest of coasters. You're venturing to an old crypt, right? And you go through the woods, very heavily wooded ride. The roller coaster is fine. It's nothing special. But then you get to the free fall drop. It was the first free fall drop coaster. It's only a 10-foot drop, so it's a little bit smaller than Verbolten even, but the theming inside that area is so much better than Verbolten, although you don't have the extended portion in the themed area. It's just the drop area is the themed portion. So you go in, and the night ride was absolutely spectacular because the woods were lit up like this creepy green and purple-ish color. And then you go in, and the building is completely dark. And then all these, dark purple, like blacklight lights come on, and you see all the Grim Reapers with the scythes on the sides of you, and it all lights up. And then you start seeing flashing, and you're creaking. And then the whole track, if you know how the drop track works on like a Verbolten or whatnot, the whole thing drops maybe a foot, and it just does a quick drop. And then you sit there for a second and you hear more noises, and then you do the 10-foot drop. So that's the interesting thing that the other free fall drop rides do not do. They don't have the fake out. Yeah. So they have the little and then the full drop. So they kind of give you a little bit of a jolt, and then they electrocute you, if you will. And then when you get to the bottom portion, it's dark. And then more things light up, and it's skeletons, bones. It's a transition from the arriving at the crypt to now you're in the crypt, and then you go backwards, and you do a small Fire Chaser Express-esque type of finale through a backwards portion.
That's kind of cool. That's like you said, that's one you don't hear people talk a lot about. Another Intamin coaster, which is different than your Zero Verbolten. To me, the drop on Verbolten never really did anything for me. I always thought it was too short of a drop to actually matter. So when people talk about the drop on Verbolten, I'm never like, I think the portion before the drop inside the event house is a great roller coaster that there's no reason to talk about the drop. You know.
Yeah, this doesn't this doesn't have that, and in that regard, I would say the roller coaster part. If you sit, there's a trim on the first drop, which is weird. So you don't get that intense of a first drop unless you're in the back, and you do get a couple of pops of airtime. But in terms of the roller coaster part of 13,
Mm-hmm.
I would say the roller coaster part is probably a little bit better on Bolton. But I think the theming and the story is a little bit better on 13, and I prefer the drop on 13 just because it has the fake out and I think it has a little bit better execution. And I like the whole creepy storyline of 13 and how you're going through the queue and you hear the girl whispering. If you've never seen the 13 promo videos on YouTube, take a look at them. It's like this exorcist type girl, and she's whispering, "If you go down to the woods today, you better not go alone." And then at random times, like it's like Revenge of the Mummy, when you're in the queue, you hear this like low pitched like drolling, and it's really not a noise of anything. It's just like background noise. And every once in a while, you'll hear the girl whisper, 13, in the British accent, and it's really, really cool. I actually have 3 different 13 coffee mugs, which is the new collection I've started this year. You know, I've had so many T-shirts that I'm seeing the same ones over and over, and the good ones I already have. So I've started a new collection of coffee mugs, and I have 3 13 coffee mugs they're all really, really cool. So that's that. 13. Very, 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 very surprised. Very, very happy with 13. Enjoyed it a great deal.
Cool.
All right, so we'll move on to the top 3 here. Number 3 is not going to be a surprise to many. It is the Smiler. Now, earlier in the list, we had a Colossus, the former record holder for most inversions. Now we've got the current record holder at 14. Ironically, that comes right after 13. So we've got 14 inversions on the Smiler. Boy, oh boy, oh boy. What a coaster this thing is. It is fast. It is intense. It is disorienting. It is something else. It's got airtime. It's got intense positive Gs. It's got the disorienting inversions. It's got rapid fire, one right after another. This ride is nothing but inversions, and then you have 2 insane ejector airtime hills mixed in somewhere in that jumbled mess of track that's in the X sector over there. Now, I got to mention, since X sector is where Smiler is, people are going to ask about Oblivion. Oblivion was the first coaster off of this top 10 list here. I had it just below the big one, and it would be higher than the big one if it wasn't the one trick pony. But boy, what a trick it is. 60-foot tall ride, having a 180-foot drop going 120 feet underground. Really enjoyed Oblivion as well. But Smiler is the crown jewel of the X sector. Boy, oh boy, just super intense. I don't even have words to describe it. It is every bit as crazy as it looks. You do the drop right out of the station. It's funny because it's got this creepy music playing, where it's like circus music, but it's like kind of off pitch and off key, and it's got really creepy, like ha 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 ha, like it's like evil laughing sort of. And when you leave the station, these lights, like blinding lights, come on in front of you, and then you're going around the Marmalizer, the spider thing, and they've got all the different theming around there. And you do the drop right into the barrel roll, and then you do the first lift hill, 6 inversions. I remember the funniest part was when we rode Smiler, we go through the first half of the ride, right? And we stop at the base of the vertical lift, which is the second lift. And Sue goes, "Holy shit, was that 14 inversions?" And we were riding with Adam the Beard Man and Josh, Ranger from In the Loop, if you know In the Loop. And Ranger says, "No, that's just the first half. We've only done 7." She was like, "I was counting. Was that 14 inversions?" It's like, "Oh no, we're only halfway done." Like, if you split that coaster into 2, you would have 2 excellent roller coasters. And Yeah, that's kind of how Adam described Colossus. He said Colossus is a really good roller coaster, and then you do 5 barrel rolls. like that's like Smiler is 2 really good 7 inversion roller coasters mashed together with a lift hill in between. And the last time I rode Smiler was right at dusk, and I got a double duel because they are timed out where when the trains get to the top of the lift hills, they'll cross each other at the 2 first drops. And then while the one is going through like the sea serpent type inversion, the other one's going through the cobra roll. And then there's another point where they interact going over the airtime hills or whatever. I don't even know where the hell I saw the other train. All I know is I saw the other train 3 or 4 times during both halves of the ride. And that was incredible. I rode in the front row there. The airtime is amazing on those little ejector airtime hills. You see the train at some point. I don't know when the hell it is. I wasn't counting inversions. I'll trust that there's 14 on there. All I know is there is a hell of a lot of them, and they happen very, very quickly. It's a disorienting ride. It's an intense ride, certainly not for the faint of heart, but it is one hell of a ride.
Well, Smiler's always been one of those rides that since it opened that I've been kind of fascinated with. That I don't even remember if you remember this, but when it first opened, it had like a video game attached to it.
I had it.
Yeah,
I had it, and I played the game to unlock the layout. I remember that.
Yeah, and
that's the music that they play in the station. That music, and then later on, it transitions into the ha ha ha.
Yeah.
Part.
And it was just like it's always been that ride that had such a unique look, such a unique story. The logo, everything about it. In recent years, I've kind of soured on it a little bit for obvious reasons. But when that ride first came out, I was like, wow, this is something that I gotta go ride.
Well, and most people I know who have been to Alton Towers, including our group, are very, very split between their favorite ride at that park, whether it's Nemesis or Smiler. I think the entire group of 24 was pretty much split 50-50. I know Adam and Josh preferred Smiler to Nemesis. Sue and I preferred Nemesis to Smiler. I'm kind of burying the hatchet there a little bit, but I don't think that's coming to a surprise at this point here as we get into the top 2. People are probably wondering what that other one is, but I think Drew the intern said it back because he preferred Smiler. Smiler, I think, was his favorite ride of the trip. He said after he got off Smiler, he said, this is what Cedar Point needs next, because that's what's missing from Cedar Point's collection of all the record holders they have. They've never had the inversion record. Well, I guess a corkscrew they did, but in recent memory, they haven't had the inversion record. They've had like most inversions on a stand-up, most inversions on an invert, most inversions on a wing coaster. In a very, very long time, they have not held the most inversions on a roller coaster record. And if they wanted to go 15, 16 inversions and built something like Smiler,
you could just build a Larson loop, call it a day.
Oh, gee. Well, here we go. We're not getting into that tonight. Now I've got the top 2, and number 2 is the other surprise here. I do want to mention real quick the other couple parks we went to. Southport Pleasureland, little tiny park on the water. Not really a lot to talk about there, except we got evac'd from a Pinfari looper, which is as awful as it sounds. Yeah. We went through the entire layout once, coming towards the brakes, stormed right through the exit platform, made the quick right turn. My harness came unlocked. We went through the entrance platform. My harness locked again, relocked, went storming through the entrance platform, back up the lift hill. Tim holler and yells, "You guys are going again?" Like, no, we're not supposed to. They stopped the lift hill, and they had to come out with the screwdriver and the wrench and get us out. And I didn't see the ride run again after that. And lots of pictures of that one. That is quite the story there. The other, a weird ghost train dark ride at this park too. Very, very strange. We also did Adventure Island, which was the very first park of the trip, a little seaside park to the east of London. This is home to the Rage Gerslauer Eurofighter, one of the very first, I think it might have been the first of that model. Smooth ride, very good ride. This is also where the naked roller coaster is, where it was the most naked roller coaster, most naked people on a roller coaster, and they have a sign out front that says, "Hey, this is where the Guinness World Record for most naked people on a roller coaster was." We remained fully clothed during our ride. It's on the green screen, which is one of those zero super long ass train kiddie coasters that's kind of high elevated. Adventure Island had one of the coolest dark rides of the entire trip, though. So they also had an old school crooked house, which was very, very fun. Not too many of those around, but they had one called Adventureville. And a spoiler alert here, fast forward maybe 2 minutes if you don't want to hear about this. So it almost looks like it's on Coaster Track. And you go through, it's a dark ride, and it's the little furry, like, teddy bears, colored teddy bears that live at Adventure Island, and they live in Adventureville. And you go through, there's animatronic bears, and they're, like, in houses, and then there's, like, a theme park section, and then there's, like, a beach section. You go through it once, and the tune is so catchy. It's like, do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do. Like, it's very kid-friendly. It doesn't offend anyone. It's just really cute and carefree and colorful. You go through it once and you come back to the station. You go through a second time and it's like black light and it's very dark and you hear them snoring and it's like lullaby music. And then you hear like a rooster or whatever, and it's like, it's time to party. And then it's like a disco, and it's like with like techno music, and it's like disco ball and strobes and like lasers and everything. It's super, super strange. But it was a hell of a lot of fun, especially since the entire coaster crew was riding it together. So it's just, we had a lot of fun on that ride. So definitely recommend at least that ride, and the park was actually really nice and clean and friendly too. Probably a lot better than most of your Jersey boardwalk parks. It was very nicely themed. They also had another dark ride there. I think what's it called? Booville or I forgot what it was called now. Because Adventureville was so much fun. But they have most of these parks have at least one or two dark rides. So that was a lot of fun. And then Chessington is the other one that I have to mention that doesn't have a ride. Chessington is kind of like, I would say it's the Legoland of the UK. Owned by Merlin, same folks. Very well themed, safari theming, zoo theming. They have animals there. A lot of kid and family friendly rides. 4 coasters. They have the Arrow floorless suspended coaster, the Vampire, which was very well done. They have an outstanding spinning coaster called Dragon's Fury, custom Mountezuma spinning coaster. Alton also has one, the Spinball Wizard, and then a Wild Mouse, and then your Mack Rides Powered Mine Train, if you will, and a pretty good shooting dark ride called Tomb Blaster, I think it is, mummy themed, very well done. Chessington, a fantastic park. I wish we had time to talk about it more, but so those were the other parks that we hit. Oh, and Drayton Manor. Also, Drayton Manor, which has the Thomas the Tank Engine land. 5-year-old Danny Miller was happy inside. If you are friends with me on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, you saw that I posted tons of pictures from Thomas Land because Thomas was my boy growing up as a kid, so very much enjoyed that as well. And the weird Intamin stand-up coaster with a 0G roll, only 0G roll on a stand-up in the world, and G-Force, which is the weird Mountezuma X car ride with that weird shaped lift hill, that bean-shaped loop lift hill, and then the only ride in the world with a bent Cuban 8 element, which is essentially 2 Immelmans that are somehow sitting right next to each other. Very, very strange ride, but a very fun ride. We had ERT on it, rode it 10 times. Prefer it to, I would say it's maybe in like a Fahrenheit type of category, better than the Eurofighters, but not quite as good as like a Colossus, if you will. All right, you ready for the top 2?
I'm ready.
All right, so number 1 is probably obvious at this point. Number 2 is the one that's going to surprise a lot of people unless you were on the trip, the Ultimate at Lightwater Valley. And here's how I'll describe the Ultimate. And a lot of you listening or watching may have never heard of this ride. And this was a ride I was excited to see got added to the itinerary at some point. Actually, credit to Drew the intern, because he told Tim, he said, we need to go to Lightwater Valley and ride this ride. Andy, you like to make fun of the Beast and how the Beast doesn't have any elements and it's just a really fast train.
That's not me making fun of it. That's truth. That's
whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
You like to tear apart the beast because
Yeah.
it doesn't have elements, it doesn't have hills, it doesn't have forces.
Yeah, true.
I imagine that the ultimate is the steel version of what you think the beast ought to be.
Okay, so that's something then.
So this is the longest roller coaster in Europe. I think it's the second longest coaster in the world behind Steel Dragon. It's something like 70. I don't know the exact number. It's 7,700 feet long, roughly, a little bit longer than the Beast. The first lift hill. After that, and Lightwater Valley is very hard to find. It's out in the middle of farmland. So when you're driving through farms. You see sheep. And this is kind of where the park is. It's kind of just out in the pasture. And this ride, you're so far away from the theme park when you get out to the second lift hill. You can't even really see any rides except for their drop tower. So the first lift hill, you drop, and you're following the terrain, just like on, say, the Beast or even like a Boulder Dash, if you will. And it's got like Magnum-esque ejector airtime hills. You got 2 or 3 of those. And then you kind of meander through some trees, and you do like the little weeble wobble, like that's on Twisted Colossus. You do a lot of those leading up to the second lift hill. The first half is fine. You've got 2 or 3 good pops of airtime, and you're just going really fast, and you're really close to the ground. At 2 different points in history, the ride has actually hit a deer that's been crossing the track here. That's happened on 2 different occasions. There's a really funny YouTube video out there.
Oh my God, I think I've seen
yeah, and it's got like an animation of it, and it shows like the deer being decapitated and like the blood getting all over the riders. Really, really funny. Go check it out. So then you get to the second lift hill. And when you get to the top of the second lift hill, it's flat and makes a left-hand turn, and you see the drop. And so you're kind of on flat land here, but then you see this giant ravine, like this giant valley that's maybe like 30, 40 feet deep, and it's lined with trees. It's completely filled with trees, and the track disappears down into this valley where all these trees are, and you can't see any track after that. And this is where the forces come in. And this ride is rough as hell. It's side to side, and watch a POV of it, and you'll see how rough it is. And this ride does everything it possibly can, because it's just doing U-turns. It's doing side to side, side to side, side to side, airtime hill, weird side to side, helix that's not banked, turn that's not banked, crazy airtime hill, tunnel. And then it kind of meanders its way back to the station at the end. Incredibly forceful. I thought I was going to be thrown out to the side on several occasions on this ride. This ride is just so batshit crazy. I don't know how to describe it. Mm-hmm. I would say if you took the intensity and the roughness of Magnum XL 200 and the forces of Magnum and put those forces on a ride that does what you wish the Beast did, that's kind of what this ride is. It's crazy. Yeah. It's a steel coaster. It was designed, but then they didn't have anyone to build it, so they hired a railroad company, British Rail, to build the track. So it's built like railroad tracks, where it's like it does like the weird arrow thing where when you go into the turn, it like banks before it hits the turn, and then it hits the turn really awkwardly. Which is part of the ride. Part of the reason this ride is so great, because the lateral forces are absolutely out of control, and there's no banking. Like, you don't bank train tracks, so why would they bank roller coaster track? Like, it's amazing that and this ride is at such a tiny little park. And you would enjoy this park for their other ride, their other big roller coaster, which is Raptor Attack. Yeah. And so Raptor Attack is a Schwarzkopf Wildcat model, so Cedar Point-esque ride, buried underground.
Legit Wildcat, yeah.
Yeah, legit Wildcat, buried underground, and you have to go through like a sewer that's been the story. It used to be like sewer rat themed, but the story is they've dug too deep and they've discovered like dinosaur fossils, and they've come back to life in the form of raptors. So you go down this weird sewer tunnel, which is like 4 feet high. I had to duck to like get into this tunnel and like through this is bad. And there's people who are like 6'7" on this trip that are like crawling through this tunnel to get to this ride. And you would think, Cedar Fair and Six Flags logic says, okay, Wildcat in a box. But at various points, and I'm not going to tell you where, but at various points along the ride track, a scene lights up that's a velociraptor eating a miner.
Yeah.
Like, not like under 18 miner, like coal miner, right?
Either way, it's still fun.
Either way. But there's like blood and gore, and at one point you see like a head being ripped off, and they're animatronics too. They're not just like cardboard cutouts, they're actual animatronics, and they scare the living hell out of you. And it's a lot of fun. You would this would probably be your new number one, because it's Raptor themed. It's a Schwarzkopf Wildcat. You got the Cedar Point nostalgia. This would be your new number one.
Does it have the Wildcat stop though?
At the end?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely it does.
Well, that makes it.
Absolutely. The ride operator, before they dispatch us, said, hang on at the end. Or let's see. How exactly did they say it? Hang on to the ride at the very end. It stops quite short.
Oh my God!
It stops short at the end. It stops very short.
I love a good Wildcat stop.
Oh my goodness, such a fun ride. Those things are great, and I was really glad to see that this one was themed to the nines. And the exit pathway is very well themed as well. I'm not going to spoil it in case you ever decide to go there, but there is some nice surprises in the exit queue as well. All right. Well, if you couldn't guess, what do you think?
Raptor Dog here is
Raptor Dog likes the story of Raptor Attack. So no surprise as to what number one was, right? I mean, if you were following me during this 7-day trip, 7 days, 11 parks, you knew that I hit a milestone on this trip. You knew that I was planning out my milestone. I think we even talked about this on a show at some point. And my planning worked perfectly. And I got to ride Nemesis at Alton Towers as my 600th coaster. And we've talked about this, I don't know for how many years, Andy. We've talked about the Thrilling 32, that Nemesis has been the coaster for 4 or 5 years that was always at the top of my I need to go ride it list. And Alton Towers was always at the top of a park I want to go visit. And we're going to have to do an entire show on Alton Towers because I could talk about it for days. The story, the theming, the castle. There's rides in the castle. There's haunt mazes in the castle that were amazing. The theming. I described Alton Towers as Busch Gardens, but it's real. Mm-hmm. It's a real castle. It's really England. The botanical gardens are beautiful. The theming is absolutely spectacular. And I feel like you would very much enjoy Nemesis because you're a front seat guy on the inverts. And the visuals on the front seat of Nemesis are absolutely spectacular. You have the near misses, you have the rock walls, you have the water, you have the theming, you have the weird alien theming, you have the trenches. It's everything that a really good inverted coaster ought to be. It's intense, it's smooth, it takes advantage of the fact that it's an inverted coaster. It's got the B&M roar to it. It's got a great theme. The track was just repainted 2 years ago, and they did shit to the track to make it look like it was rusted and decrepit and like it was built in 1994, the year of Raptor. Yeah. And this has always been your sentimental ride in the Thrilling 32 because
British Raptor.
It's British Raptor. Oh my God! And I thought it was a good ride in the front seat, but in the back seat, it is just super intense. Personally, I think one of the most intense rides I've been on. It is a shorter ride, but there is not a dull moment throughout the ride. A lot like Banshee, you could almost say that Banshee at some point has like a lulling point. At some point, you know, maybe when you get to the top of that, some people don't like the barrel roll. Some people think the 0G is kind of a throwaway in order to get you to the drop into the review.
0G is the best part of the ride, into the drop.
No, I'm not saying I think that. I'm saying other people think that. Now, I think
people are stupid. You can just say that. Those people are stupid.
I think the best part of Banshee is the 0G roll because it's all intensity, and then they hit you with that at the end. But, you know, like Montu has kind of a lull in the second half. Alpengeist second half is kind of Afterburn has that little weird hill where it's like you get to – even Raptor has kind of like, you know, the mid-course brake run, you kind of like there's not a spot on Nemesis where you can go – and get your breath. And that's one thing I really, really liked about it. everyone likes the back right because after the corkscrew, that's like the first real element of the ride, there's a downward helix and you're along the ground there. I like the back left because after you do that helix and go into like a 50-foot drop out of that helix, you go into the 0G roll, which goes right over the station. And on the left side, you get an arm, leg, chopper near miss with the top of the station, which is like the one alien's like arm that's morphing into the track.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a rock wall when you do the helix there. And then you hear the B&M roar echoing on your left side as you go through the loop because you're like 80 feet below grade at that point, and it's just down in the trench. Very rare opportunity to get night rides on Nemesis. It's lit up blood red, not so bright that it ruins the nighttime aspect of it, but just enough to kind of be creepy and scary. Yeah. A nice deep crimson red, looks phenomenal. The entire area where Galactica and Nemesis are looks fantastic. The story behind Nemesis is actually told quite well. I just can't say enough good things about this ride. And of course, it's really cool when they dispatch the train. You hear a voice come over and say Nemesis. So like it's the ride that knows it's badass and acts like it's badass because it is as badass as it looks. I was really afraid that this would be the ride that disappointed me. I think some people on the trip probably were disappointed by it because of all the buildup. But for me, Nemesis was the ride that I probably built up too much, and it still lived up to my expectations and exceeded my expectations.
So I really haven't asked you this on any of the other ones, but like, where are you ultimately going to rank Nemesis now?
Well, so on which list? So as we've talked about before, I have two lists. I have two lists. I have a subjective list and an objective list where I actually rank them based on forces, theming, length. Nemesis does lose a little bit on length, but in terms of favorite roller coaster, and if I had two roller coasters sitting next to each other and I get one ride on one of them, which one do I pick? Nemesis is up there with Manta in terms of my favorite roller coasters.
No shit.
Yeah.
No shit.
I liked it that much. And some people are going to call me crazy. Some people won't.
New number one!
No, I didn't say new number one.
Where are the lights?
I didn't say new number one. Let's be clear. I didn't say new number one.
The band.
I didn't say new number one. Let's be clear.
Confetti falling.
And again, but this is something we've talked about before, and how when people go overseas, they tend to rank these rides highly. And and having experienced that now, I will say I can back up the fact that that's what's going on here, and I'll tell you why. Because I don't know when I'm going to ride Nemesis again. I know I'll get to ride Manta this year. I know I'll get to ride Fury this year. I know I'll get to ride Maverick this year. I know I'll get to ride Apollo's Chariot this year. I may not ride Nemesis for another 10 years. And that's why Rita was closed all day at Alton Towers, and it opened up they closed at 9:00, and it opened up about 8:15, or like 7:45 it opened, and we had to leave by like 8:30 to get back to the bus, which was at our hotel, which was the on-site hotel. And someone posted in the event Facebook group that Rita opened around 7:50, and we were in line for Nemesis night rides. And we were with Matt from Yorkshire, and it was myself, Sue, Matt, and then Bex, his girlfriend. And I was like, I haven't ridden Rita yet. Some people went over to get the credit, and I said, Matt was like, what do you want to do? And I was like, there's no way I'm passing up night rides on this ride to go get a credit. I'm sorry, I'm not doing it. So I skipped Rita to get multiple night rides on Nemesis, and I do not regret that decision at all. And that's fine. I'll go back. I liked it enough that I'll go back and I'll get to ride Rita one day.
And
But
Rita's not that impressive of a ride. Well,
no,
it's basically Accelerator, right?
Yeah, it's 3 hills, a couple turns. You know, if it was something like 13 or Smiler, absolutely.
Yeah.
Different story. But Rita, I was not passing up Nemesis night rides, and I even asked Matt while we were in line. I was like, "Is it really worth going over there?" He said, "Absolutely not." Matt from Yorkshire, Nemesis is a top couple ride for him as well, and he's been over here. I mean, he's ridden Fury. I think Fury's the only ride he puts above Nemesis. But and again, you know, he may not ride Fury for another 5 years. He can ride. He's only a couple hours from Alton Towers. He can go anytime. That's kind of like his sentimental favorite is Nemesis, the way mine's always been Manta. You know, Manta is my sentimental favorite for really no reason other the fact that I just really like the ride. Like, it wasn't a milestone for me, but the fact when you combine the theming, which I'm very big on, the fact that it was a very, very good ride and a very intense ride. I love inverted coasters. This has been one that I've been looking forward to for many, 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 many years. And the fact that it was a major milestone, being my 600th roller coaster, all things considered, it's not the best roller coaster I've been on. I mean, the best steel roller coaster I think I've been on is Fury 325. I think that's the best one. But in terms of favorite and say what ride do I want to go right now, Nemesis is right up there towards the very top of the list. And again, we talk about it with rides that are maybe not less ridden because so many people have ridden Nemesis now. Yeah. But for the U.S. folks who haven't been over there, it looks kind of skewed because I may not go back over there for 5 to 10 years. And it's purely, and maybe that's why I rank El Toro so low, because it's right down the road and I can ride it whenever I want, or like the Dorney rides. But Nemesis, I want to ride it all the time because I know I'm not going to be able to ride it for a very long time. Mm-hmm. So I think there is truth. You know, we always kind of make fun of people for that, but I think there is some truth to that a ride that you ride far less often is going to rank higher when it impresses you. And I think that's why rides like Ultimate and Smiler and 13 and Swarm and Nemesis are going to be in my top, 35 to 40 steel coasters. You know, if you've got someone from England who's ridden 700 roller coasters, they may not rank those rides as high because they ride them all the time. So, I'm not trying to justify myself here, even though I am.
Yeah, sure.
But you'll probably go over to England in 3 to 5 years if you ever do, and you'll ride Nemesis and be like, I came all the way over here for this. I was duped by Danny Miller.
I don't know, because at the same time, I've been to parks in America that I've been on rides and that I don't plan on returning to anytime soon. Like, I don't plan on returning to, Six Flags Great Adventure, yet I'm not over-ranking shit that's there,
Yeah, but again, that's something that if you really wanted to, you could go back there pretty easily. You fly from Chicago to Philly and you go for a week.
I could, At the same time, I drove out to Great Adventure, which is like a 16-hour drive. It was a 16-hour flight to England, and
you were also on a big road trip too.
Yeah. But I'm just saying, I don't know. I've been to a lot of places that I'm kind of like, well, I probably won't go back to. It's not like I'm overrated.
Yeah, but see, I don't have that attitude about Alton Towers. Alton Towers is a park that I absolutely want to go back to because you guys know Busch Gardens Williamsburg is my favorite park, and this felt a lot like that park, but it was real. Yeah. So I really think we talked about Invader kind of completing the collection there, and how Vodon completed the collection at Europa Park in terms of having a wood coaster. Wicker Man is going to kind of complete the collection at Alton Towers to a certain extent because they're going to get that wood coaster. So, Alton Towers is going to improve as a park. Now they've had some rides shut down recently since the Smiler incident, but it's still a very, very good park. They've got good dark rides. They've got amazing theming, amazing scenery, very clean. And the rides are so good. I mean, as you saw here, Oblivion would have been number 11 on this list. So between Oblivion, Galactica, 13, Smiler, and Nemesis, of the top 11 coasters on this trip, 5 of them are from Alton Towers. So
And let's be clear here too that usually when we talk about people going overseas and ranking shit, it's stuff that's absolutely ridiculous. It's people that are ranking Liseberg Bonin in their top 10.
Nemesis has been a top 5 coaster in the Thrilling 32 for the past 3 years now, so it's not like I'm completely insane here.
Exactly.
We have UK and German people who are ranking it highly too.
It's like most people who ride Nemesis say it's a very good coaster. Most people don't sit there and say Nemesis is crap or junk, or most people say it's very good to a very great coaster. And when we talk about the people that go overseas and make a list based on where they've been as their top 10, it's because they want to show off. And let's be honest with that's what that is. Like, come on, you're going to sit there and tell me that these crap rides are in your top 10. Like, get out of here. You want to put a statement to show off where you've been, go ahead, do a circle jerk. I don't care. But
I'll just read you off my current top 15 steel coasters as it stands after the England trip, and you'll see maybe 3 or 4 subjective favorites, like soft spot sentimental favorites, but then you're going to see a lot of chalk too, a lot of rides that are ranked highly everywhere. So Manta, Nemesis, Fury 325, Intimidator 305, Maverick, Apollo's Chariot, Superman at New England, Behemoth, Leviathan, Millennium Force, Thunderbird, Mako, Banshee, Wicked Cyclone, The Ultimate. That's how my top 15 currently stands. There's not a lot of bullshit in there.
There's a few bullshit things.
There's a few. I know you don't like Wicked Cyclone. I know you don't like Apollo's Chariot. I know you don't like Superman.
But I can deal with the people. Like, I think Superman is crap, but there's enough people that like Superman out there that
you're not surprised.
Like, whatever, Apollo, you're on the nostalgia kick there. Like, and really, Apollo's no different than any of the other B&M hypers. At the end of the day,
I wrote Apollo 2 weeks before I went on this trip, and I still loved it. Yeah. But I mean, like, you're totally on board with the Furies and the Mavericks and the Millenniums and the Leviathans and the Thunderbirds and even Banshee to an extent. I mean, a lot of, like,
they're all in my top 15 too.
Yeah. So I mean, you're still looking at, after that, you're looking at, your Sky Rushes and your Diamondbacks and Goliaths, and then you start to get into where Smiler is down there in the 20s for me. I put Smiler just above Monster and Cannibal. Although I think there is a little bit of a gap between Monster and Smiler. Smiler is much better than Monster. I think there is a little bit of a gap to be had there, but it's I don't have one of these crazy lists. I've got I think a pretty standard list in maybe a little bit of a shuffled order, and I have 3 or 4 favorites thrown in there.
Yeah, and it's just and I've said this. It's the people that make their lists as a look at me and look at where I've been, and to me it's ridiculous. To me, it's not even a list.
Yeah.
It's not a top 10. It's what you want to show off to people. And at the end of the day, those people are pretentious, and I don't need them. I don't need them in my life, because if that's how you get off, if that's what your big thing is to make yourself feel better, go right ahead, because I'm not impressed by it at all. Congrats.
Well, and I would say maybe I could compare Nemesis to how you and I felt about Lightning Rod. Like, when you look forward to a ride for so long, and then it lives up to and maybe even exceeds expectations, you rank it very highly. And that's what happened with me with Nemesis. And I think that's what happened with Adam and Josh on Smiler. Maybe not so much Nemesis, but maybe it's because they didn't have Smiler built up as much as Nemesis. But when you build a ride up so much, it has the potential to fall flat on its face, but it also has the potential to, when it exceeds your expectations, to become one of your favorite rides.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's what happened.
So overall, it sounds like you had a pretty good trip to England. Sounds like you want to go back.
And there's so much we didn't even talk about. Like, we didn't talk about almost any of the dark rides. We didn't talk about some of the, the fun stories. There's 5 dark rides at Blackpool Pleasure Beach. We didn't even talk about any of those.
Yeah.
Valhalla, the steeplechase coaster, which is coming back, by the way. We need to do an update on this from IAPA. SNS is bringing back the old school Aero steeplechase style ride, which first single rail roller coaster. Excuse me, I rode 3 of them on this trip, and they all were right next to each other at Blackpool Pleasure Beach. A lot of fun too, and I really hope that maybe those make a comeback because those are a lot of fun.
I do appreciate throughout this whole hour plus discussion that RMC wasn't brought up once, and that makes this a great discussion.
Absolutely, I'll tell you what, and like Steeplechase is the ride that some other people would have as their number one.
Yeah.
Fun ride, great little ride. I liked it a lot. Not a top 10 roller coaster, folks. Sorry. It's a lot of fun. It's nostalgic. It's historical. It's iconic. I get it. But, I mean, Nemesis is the ride. Smiler is the ride. The Ultimate, those are the rides, folks.
Yeah.
Come on.
So, well, as always, thank you for joining us here. But before we go, we do want to say one other thing, and that is...
Vote Nemesis number 1 in the Ride Warrior Choice Award.
Is that the Ride Warrior Choice Awards are open. We already know that Nemesis is going to probably do well this year. So
well, it always does well.
It always does well, but now that he's ranked number 1 all of a sudden.
Yeah, but you also have people who are probably going to rank a little bit lower than that too. So keep that in mind as well.
So voting is currently open. You can go to, we have a number of different Facebook groups out there. You can go to ridewarriorchoiceawards.weebly.com. That will also take you to this poll. So please participate in that. You have a little bit of over a month here to get your ballot in. I still haven't even submitted mine.
Yeah. What are you doing here? Helping run the show here, and don't even have yours in yet. So I think we said January 1st at the end of the night Eastern time. January 1st is when we're gonna cut it off. So you do have about a month or so. We've already surpassed last year's voting total. We're hovering around the 300 mark right now. Last year we had 228. So, a round of applause for the voters so far. Keep spreading the word. And we do want to mention just a few folks who have helped spread the word to get the word out about this poll, which is helping our voter numbers as well. Obviously, us here at COASTER.net, Adams Coaster Chronicles, Arthur Levine on Twitter, the Best Park and Roller Coaster Seekers, Coaster Addict, BW Theme Park, the Coaster Crew, Coaster Studios, Coaster 101, CoasterRadio.com, Negative G, LO Coaster, the Amusement Park Rats, Ride This One podcast, and the Theme Park Families podcast have all helped us out by spreading the word, have been posting the link to the poll. So a very special thank you to all those folks for helping us out. We've had people come in and say they've heard about the poll from all of those sites thus far already. So, if you're joining us from one of those sites, welcome. And thank you for voting. And we hope you guys are in it for the long run here.
Absolutely. So as always, thank you for joining us here on COASTER.net Uncut. I'm, of course, Andrew Barchak from Chicago, Illinois.
And I'm Danny Miller from Binghamton, New York.
And as always, right on, Ride Warriors.
Cheerio, chaps.